Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. Today, we're firmly in the camp of risk management, as my guest is Professor Hernan Huwyler, who is Head of Risk at Milestone, which is part of Canon. And he and I talk about the benefits or otherwise of qualitative risk management, such as heat maps. And the title, indeed, of the event that we're going to show you the recording of was Ditch Your Heat Maps and How to Quantify Operational and Safety Risks. So we set the scene on that first. Hernan then goes into some presentation slides and gives us his view. And then, as always, on these sessions, we open it up to questions from the audience. We have a very lively debate and discussion, and I think share huge amounts of insights, and you'll definitely get value from this episode. The slides are available as a download, and those are going to be available in the show notes, as is the model that Hernan talks about. There's an Excel model, and what I'd really love is for you to take that away, have a play with it, and then come back to me with feedback, perhaps post it on LinkedIn, give us some feedback on the model, how it's working for you, and we can all move towards trying to, as much as possible, quantify risk and therefore drive down and manage risk better. Hope you enjoy this workshop and see you again on the other side of the credits. Cheers.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week, we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints, and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
So thank you, everybody, for joining this roundtable session today. What I'm going to do is keep admitting people into the room, because there's going to be people coming in for the next couple of minutes, I'm sure. But we'll get started because we are recording this, and it will be available on YouTube and on the podcast afterwards as well. So let's get into it and be respectful of the people that have turned up on time. So I'm delighted to be co-hosting this session today. We're going to be challenging some thoughts about heat maps and how we present and think about risk. And I'm joined by Hernan, who's going to give a quick introduction to himself in a minute. I'm going to ask him a couple of questions to set some context, and then he's going to share some thoughts, some slides and a model around this question. These sessions are always interactive, so if you're on the Zoom with us today, please pop any questions into the chat or raise your hand at the end, and we can open people up and allow people to join and ask questions. If you're watching this on LinkedIn, streaming it live with us, then please put your questions in the chat and I will get to those as well. So Hernan, firstly, welcome. Do you want to just give a quick intro to yourself and then we can get into it? Oh, I muted you. I muted everybody, so you'll have to unmute yourself. Sorry.
Now we go. Thank you, Christian, for having me today. My name is Hernan Huwyler. I've been playing with risks in the last 25 years in the oil and gas industry, in the software sector, in the service sector, in the construction, water, and I have seen a lot of advances in the way that we are planning and we are supporting decision-making with different tools in risk management. I'm also a professor, so I am very used to introduce these topics that sometimes they are, they're changing the status quo or what are we doing, in a way that we can finally provide tools that you can apply in practice.
Perfect. Thank you very much, and it's really great to have you here today. So let's just set a bit of the scene then. we're going to be talking about heat maps today. So why do you think heat maps are popular, and why are they so widely used, or why have they been so widely used in the past?
It's very easy to explain a consultant or somebody that is trying to do a risk assessment, a heat map. Basically, you only need to explain red, bad, green, good. And I think that everybody is able to relate to this color with the street lights, and it looks so appealing that it's a combination, causes and consequences, and you are plotting and you are working, and it gives you a document that says risk management or risk assessment, and you can check the box very fast, very easily, and everybody thinks that is right, because how we cannot agree that safety risks are catastrophic or important or high or red. So it's very easy to get an agreement on the perceptions of risk. That's why they are so popular, so easy. As consulting the horoscope is very popular to address risk in life.
Yeah.
Some people like that.
Yeah. Okay. And then conversely, what are the benefits at a headline level of using a more data-driven assessment of risk?
The first benefit is that you are able to speak the language of business. When you need to decide how much you need to invest, if it's worthy to use a contractor against other contractor that is not so safe, but however is cheaper. When you need to assess how much you need to cover an insurance policy, when you need to assess how much is the reserve that you need to keep aside to execute the project in order to address security risks or any type of risk. You need to quantify risk. You need to understand different scenarios, and understanding that risk is not a single scenario that you can plot with a single impact and a single probability, but also it's a lot of different probabilities in which you are maybe more luckier or less luckier in one scenarios, and you are able to minimize, because you are using data, biases. Now we are not talking about colors or adjectives. We are talking about money and probabilities in a time horizon, and everybody is aligned. And because of that, you are not only deciding better, you are using data better, you are able to follow ISO standards better. You can explain if there is an incident, if there is a security breach, much better to whoever that asks, eventually even a prosecutor, that you can tell, I haven't implemented that control because data was showing me that this position was low. That is very different than trying to explain to a prosecutor, oh, we were not investing in this control because 3 guys in a room decided that it was a green risk. You cannot explain that if there is an incident. So in terms of corporate defense, you need to look at the data.
Yeah, so we know we can prove rather than we think or we felt. Yeah. Perfect. Well, look, that's a good bit of context. Do you want to get into your slides and talk through kind of what you wanted to, and the model that you wanted to share with us today? And then at the end, as I said, there's going to be an opportunity for everybody to ask Hernan any questions that they've got that they would like to raise. If you want to do that, just type it in the chat or raise your hand, and I'll call you up to talk at the appropriate time.
Absolutely, thank you. You should be able to see the screen, and one of the things that we want to discuss, that we know with a hidden number of scientific research coming even from the 60s, that, for instance, trying to use adjectives in order to measure the probability of risk to happen is wrong. Because when we are using these heat maps that are linked to frequencies like high, medium, probable, not probable, highly unlikely, or the impact major, minor, it brings different references for different people. And we all may think that we are communicating, but what we have in our mind is completely different. And there is a research, it's a very strong research coming from in this case, from the 60s, showing that there is a lot of discrepancies in what we assess as likely or probable or highly unlikely. And there are some people that are even not understanding highly likely for an event to happen or not happening. So we think that when we are using adjectives, we are communicating, but actually we are not. We are adding more confusion in the way that we are planning. And we all have an opinion. But when it comes to the ISO standard on risk management, the ISO 31000, it's asking as a principle that we need to use the best available data to assess risk. And we cannot say in 2023 that we don't have data. And even though in qualitative risk management, we have some tools in order to get this data or to estimate this data with a scientific approach. And because of that, we are not also addressing the cultural factors and the biases. We basically are mapping in a heat map the perceived risk. And there is another problem, also highly shown by science, that we cannot aggregate risks that they are coming from a heat map. We cannot say that 2 green risks equal 1 yellow risk, or 2 yellow risks and a green risk is going to be 2 green risks. There is not a way that you can add adjectives and colors that you cannot add oranges, apples, and bananas. And the selection of the values is also very discretional. You are just adding that this is an impact up to 1 million pounds, or highly probable to happen in 1 year, or many cases in 1 year, or many accidents. But just trying to assess those scenarios is not a clerical exercise. And the values that we are using in the thresholds here are very discretional, and also the functions that we are using, they are going to overlap. It's going to be wrong if we try to use an approach followed by the combination of one impact and one probability. They are going to overlap. This is a problem called compression that you cannot solve it. Mathematically, you cannot solve it. You're always going to have risks that they say that they are, let's say, yellow, but in fact they are red. And also, because you are not measuring the exposure, you are unable to tell how much you need to invest. And also, you can, in a heat map, only map a risk with one bubble, one dot. But the problem is that you are missing the whole distribution of different scenarios. When we are talking about a sleep risk, okay, there are a lot of different scenarios. And you cannot simplify that with one single bubble. The consequences may be very different, and the probability of this consequence will be very different. So trying to use only one scenario is unclear. Are we assessing the worst scenario, the best case scenario, the what? And also, you cannot demonstrate how you are protecting in terms of due care and due diligence your operations. You cannot tell a prosecutor or a lawyer that you decided to do A or B and not investing more on controls because 3 guys in a room decided that it was green. So there is an alternative. It's an alternative that it was before this approach happening. So risk management in the 40s probabilistic science was this way, and is still this way, that we are using the data. We are generating the data, we know about incidents, we know about near misses, we know how much we are losing, we know about the different type of events that we are facing. We also ensure that we are capturing and controlling and normalizing all the data that we have. And we put that data in a model. We need to have a way that we are assessing in the future, because the data is always going to be in the past. In the future, how we foresee that this risk will impact the organization, how much that is cost. And then you will have different scenarios, and it's going to give different level of reserves. So in order to cover 10% of the risk in this project, you need to set apart this amount of money a year. If you want to cover 80% of the risk, you will need to save more to set a reserve that is higher. And you can compare that it is worth it. It is worth it to try to get this work and this contract and this project in terms of the price. You cannot tell, have a reserve for risk that is red or green. It doesn't make anything as a business decision. When you are telling, look, are you sure that we can promise in this work, in this operation, that this is going to be the reward for this price, that we are covering these liabilities that we have in terms of risk? And it also helps us to understand the distributions, patterns, to see the future, to extrapolate data, and also to understand what are the assumptions in planning. You are really challenging how you are planning and what you are assuming is going to happen. And you are planning and you got the business plan, and sooner or later it's going to be money. And there is an annual budget, there is a long-term planning, there is a business case, there is a contract assessment for that type of price. There is always money involved. And it's a pity that we are just wasting a lot of time to use something that is misleading in a bad day, or a waste of time in a good day. And finally, when you get the data, everybody are able to see the data, and there's not going to be an opinion. So you can show what are the real causes and consequences for the decision that you are making today, in order to change what is happening with facts. We always want to be a data-driven professional. We always want to have clear goals and targets. So using a quantitative approach is going to help you a lot in order to get these ideas crystal clear. And you are going to be much better at planning, at protecting, at getting a mandate, at getting investment, because it's not that you are showing your opinion, it's data shows that this is something that may happen. There is a research, there is a lot of research in this area. And one of the things that is very interesting is that there are papers and research, and basically any proper risk manager is going to say, okay, this is not working because of that and that and that, and it's proven. And there is nothing saying that risk matrices, also called heat maps, are working. So you may have some kind of review on the literature or something showing that, okay, it's a practice. But there is not a peer review paper justifying why it is there. And there is a lot of research. It's also coming when we have scoring, when we are saying 5 by 5 or 7 by 7, or the colors or any type of attributes. And One of the things that helps in order to get the proper approach in using data is to understand that there are different impacts in time. You may have an impact of a risk as a first year, the immediate damage. You're going to have medical costs, you're going to have property losses, production stops. That is going to be the first type of impact. And then, also, depending on the severity of the scenario, you may have also response cost. You need to clean up costs, remediation, environmental response, and everything to finally being able to come back to a normal situation. That it can be thought as a second-tier impact, depending on the type of severity of the scenarios. The more severe that the loss is happening, the most that you're going to have in terms of the response cost. And then you got continuity cost. You may need to face closures. You will need to have productivity losses because management is now focusing the attention on other topics. You're going to have emotional cost. That is coming into time. So some of the scenarios, the more severe, they also have these third tier impacts. And then at the end, you may also have some compliance and legal and contractual costs, fines, claims, compensations, and eventually you are losing the credibility from your stakeholders. Now, because of your security track, you are unable to deal with the big oil companies, or because of your security track, you are unable to bid a contract in Mexico City. So you are losing revenue. That is what we call the reputational impact on safety risk. And this risk is coming like a fourth tier. This is a more immediate impact. And you can tell how all these different costs and losses are occurring and what is the percentage or the different scenarios to happen. Another tool that we use a lot in order to put these ideas is called the bow tie. The bow tie is the clarity in which you are unable to tell for one event what are the causes and what are the consequences. This look very easy, but still is a lot of struggle in practice for risk practitioners to really understand what are the causes and the consequences for a particular event, because the causes from one event may be the consequences for others. So all the risks are interrelated, and you need to have the clarity for that particular event to identify what are the causes and what are the consequences. The causes are going to shape the probability of the risk to happen, and the consequences are going to shape the impact, how much you are losing. And you are dealing with the causes with corrective controls, and you are diminishing the way that you are exposed to the different threats, the causes, by using preventive controls. Everything that we are doing in terms of training and explaining, creating SOPs, dealing with good practices here, choosing the right vendors, choosing the right technology, the right tools, is preventive. And everything that we are doing in terms of contingency plan, response plans, and so on is going to be the corrective. So you can deal trying to minimize causes and consequences. There is nothing more, but the bow tie is going to be a very good tool for you in order to get a clear event. And then, because we were talking about the first tier, second tier, and third tier, we can think about the different consequences. And there is another tool that we are using, very, very, very useful in quantitative risk management, that you can apply right now. That is a decision tree. A decision tree is the way that we are just dividing all the consequences in different tiers and having a different chances for them to happen. Let's think that we have a work. There are some a scenario that we are assessing in terms of a landslide event. So you may think that the scenario for that particular work may be that a landslide may lead to injuries and damage. That is a very short way to describe the scenarios. You need to go deeper with the perimeter and to understand, for instance, what is the volume of the landslide. And we can say, okay, 2 to 10 acres. What will be the type of event that will happen? Okay, it may occur during work hours. We are expecting this risk to materialize in this scenario when there are workers and there is a normal condition. And you may also say, okay, how much do I have in the budget for this type of events? And then you can say, okay, I don't have any insurance, but I had a budget here for addressing this event. When we calculated the price of this work, when we have the business plan for this construction or whatever, there was a number here. It may or may not be there. And you identify what will be in that particular work, the threat, the causes. And you can say that somebody is overloading part of the structure. It may be a natural hazard. It may be a heavy rain that is going to trigger the landslide, or they may be undetected weaknesses in the engineering work. So you put all the consequences there and you keep them aside when you are discussing the different probabilities. But in terms of discussing the consequences, you start dividing. And you can say, okay, for the first year, if this scenario happens, what will be the medical cost in the best and the worst case scenario? What will be the property losses in the best and worst scenarios? And you can create like the different branches, the different channels that this risk will materialize with the chances of occurrence. You can say that there may be some water damage that you need to address, and it's not only earthwork. And then you go to the third tier and you say, okay, I will need to have a closure of the work for so many days. Because of that, I will have this cost in the best and the worst scenario, or eventually it will not be any continuity losses. I got the landslide, but I'm still in this scenario able to continue with the work. Once that you have these calculations, the decision tree as a tool is going to allow you to multiply the different costs by the percentage of chances of occurrence. You put all together, and you can assess that the risk in this scenario, in the best case, is more than the budget, and in the worst case, is almost 2.5 times the budget that you have. So basically, you are working in this scenario that it was very optimistic, super optimistic. And that is the way that you can trigger conversation with the business. And then you can say, okay, how much do I need to invest in order to, for instance, address the underdetected weaknesses? Maybe what you need to do is to invest $3,000 in this scenario to have a proper engineering work and mitigate this event. When you are using these tools, you are sharper in the way that you are communicating the different scenarios, and you are able to tell how much you need to invest. and which is the type of solutions and controls, whether it is preventive or detective, that will help the most. You cannot do it with a wet finger in the air trying to guess if it is a red risk or not. Another thing that I like for you to consider is to start by assessing the scenarios. Understand what are the targets. What do you really want to do? Where you have lack of information, when you have uncertainties, what are the threats, what are the vulnerabilities, what are the things that you are not doing or your subcontractors are not doing that are creating more chances for this risk to occur, the vulnerabilities. And also, when you are discussing scenarios, please involve different subject matter experts in order to compensate biases. Everybody, we as risk manager also have biases. Just because the way that you are exposed to a risk is changing the way that you see it. What you are doing, you cannot be clear on the scenario. So how we can do that? Of course, looking at data is very important, but also involving other people that have different sensitivities, different experiences in terms of assessing what is important, what is the scenario, how it will happen, what we can foresee is going to be a risk that will prevent to do a target, but not a target like be safe. We need to quantify those targets. If your targets are not clear, are not properly articulated, are not quantified, you are never going to be able to use these tools. If your target is do the best that you can do, be safe as you can, minimize incidents, you are never going to be able to use quantitative tools. So the first thing is that we are always talking about the SMART objectives, and we need to measure, but the target needs to be quantified. We need to know what is the expected rate for accident, what kind of gravity you got, what is the budget that you got for a particular fine, non-compliance related to security, the compensation. You need to be clear on what, if that decision making that you are assessing is a target. And it has to be always addressing the time horizon. The target should be for the next year, for the next 3 years, for the next 10 years. One of the big problems that is also happening with the heat maps, that they don't have the time horizon. There is no time in impact probability. It's like they are talking about events that will happen in a 1 zillion year and events that they happen multiple times a year. And it makes no sense. You need to start saying, okay, those are the targets at the end of this work, at the end of this construction, when we have this contract already finished, when we are operating this year, but everything should relate to the same target. Otherwise, it's just sharing different things together. They're never going to happen. I mean, you can always think that it's going to be a meteorite and all humankind is going to be extinct. Yes, in a billion years, it's going to happen. So it's not even uncertainty on that. It's going to be 100% sure. But whether it's 100% or even zero depends on the time horizon. It is going to happen in the next microsecond? No. So whether the meteorite is 100 or zero depends on the time horizon. And it's never clarified in a heat map. So when we are saying accident, falls, likely to happen. Okay, how often? What is likely? Talking about probabilities is super important to understand that. And then you quantify losses. Even though you don't know, and you know it may be the challenge, but you know your budget, you know the cost of the asset, you know the cost of the remediation. And I fully understand that some of the extreme physical risk, they don't have a value. Life doesn't have a value. But we are not putting these things into the equation of risk management. Let's say, at least if you are not assessing the risk to construct a stadium in Qatar, you are not saying, oh, I am not going to buy these helmets or any protection equipment because it's cheaper for me to pay for the deaf worker rather than the protection equipment. We don't do that. It's part of our values and our tolerance in safety. All other things are being assessed. And also, we quantify on an annual time frame the consequences. We know how often we are exposed to threats, what are the distributions of the threat, what are the different tiers that will happen in different combinations. And there are tools. There are tools that we are using. You need to use this tool. And finally, being able to decide what to do with the risk. Now that you got the data and you got the money, you are able to say, don't do it. It's a no-go. This is something that we cannot tolerate. You can say, let's change the target. We cannot do it. This is not realistic. Let's consider whether I need to get a different type of policy. You need to say, look, I am so bad at executing this type of the work that it's much better that I go and look for another company and I outsource this work, and somebody with a better expertise is going to address this risk. Because I am not prepared. This is a strategy that we use a lot, outsourcing. You can change third parties, you can increase the preventive or contingency controls, or for some minor risk, we can say, okay, let's accept that. This is something that I can compromise. I cannot compromise a life, but I can compromise some compliance issues, some claims for the customer, and some delays. So you need to be clear what you can tolerate, what you cannot, what do you really believe, and then finally use the treatment, the termination, the transfer, or the tolerance of the risks. And the final tool before we jump into the questions and to the demo is the Monte Carlo simulations. There is a tool used from the 50s that will allow you to express randomly a plan to assess the risk. When we have an stair, one of the things that we do in order to be sure that there are no risks is shaking this stair to be sure that it's steady. Monte Carlo simulations are doing the same. It's going to look at your model and it's going to shake 10,000 times. This is the number that we usually use to say, okay, what will happen if I shake this assumption 10,000 times randomly, and let's see how solid it is. So with this idea in mind, the Monte Carlo simulation will foresee 10,000 different scenarios randomly selected, affecting what will be the different consequences and causes. So you populate the model with the best case, the worst case, and the best case. And then you tell the model how sure you are. So you can say, I am 80% sure that if there is a heavy rain, it's going to cost between 10 to 20, which means that you are 20% sure that it's going to be less than 10 or more than 20. Coming back again, you in the model can give two references, the best and the worst case, or the minimum and maximum value that you can foresee level. You can say, if there is a heavy rain, it's going to cost me from 10 to 20 with 80% confidence, which means that 20% of the scenarios will be either less than 10 or higher than 20. And because you are being pessimistic and you see that there is a long tail, it's a log normal distribution, there are more cases that is higher than 20 that less than 10. This is the principle that we are populating this model using the Monte Carlo, and it finally is going to give all the deviation from what you're planning. Is going to tell you if you want to cover 10% of the losses, you need to invest that. If you want to cover 20%, you need to invest this little more. If you want to invest 30%, you need to invest more and more. And then you can see like a histogram how much of these scenarios are assessing. Of course, that if the more that you are investing or you got reserves, it's going to be better. How better it is. And then you got risk as a function of different threats, of different uncertainties, not at a single dot that you have. So the tool that is going to be given here will allow you to play with these scenarios and the model. Everything is shown in the formula. There is nothing hidden. There is nothing that you need to pay. There are not add-ons in Excel. It's a native Excel, nothing more, that is showing all the formulas and all the enchilada that will allow you to see how the numbers are calculated. And also, you are able to add controls. If you want, you can start explaining about different threats, different agents, different vulnerabilities, and eventually what are the controls, the preventive or corrective controls that you're using right now, or the ones that you want to activate, or you want to build or implement as a result of treating the risk, if it is worth it. So in the model, there is one example, and then it has different minimum and maximum values. There is also an insurance that is say, okay, this is not going to be more than, in this case, 10,000 because you got an insurance coverage that is going to take the risk, a deductible. So this is one of the things that happen. It may be a cap on top or on the bottom of the analysis, and then you can assess how often. And you can say, I am 80% sure that is going to occur once each 10 years or 33 years. It's a long distribution. You can make it shorter if you are more sure or not. But here is quite volatile. Finally, the model is calculating the different bins, the different scenarios, how much is the annual loss, the annual expected loss, ALE, and it gives you the histogram that shows the risk in a quantitative assessment, the whole different spectrum of the risk, not a single scenario, not colors, not adjectives. So you are able to go to whoever that is owning a project or an asset or some activities and show, look, in terms of security, this is where we are right now. So what we are inventing is we have 20% chances that in the next year we're gonna lose that amount. Of course, it's a model that is simplified. It has something that you can improve in time. The idea is that you are able to see how these 10,000 scenarios are shaking those assumptions and in a random way, and it's helping a lot. This is what you can see, and finally, you, after assessing all random scenarios, you get a way that you can calculate worst or best scenarios at all. So before we jump into the questions and the discussions, let me summarize. We are not professionals that are speaking and talking about risk in colors, in adjective, in 5x5 scores. We are not using the wet finger in the air, just trying to foresee whatever that we have in mind in order to do a risk assessment to simplify a paper compliance and get a document that is justifying the decision that we already made, the negligence that we are already accepting, the easy way of working that we say, okay, this is the way and we are going to justify going ahead. We are professionals that we want to maximize the chances to succeed. Meanwhile, we are protecting our assets, our people, our credibility. And we are using the best data and the best tool that we know in order to plan better and to protect the people. We cannot use tools that we know for sure that they are wrong, and it's demonstrated that they are wrong, particularly when we have the mission to protect people. This is not ethical at all. So use the data, use the model, improve your area. This is the hottest topics that you may have in security, how you are planning. You need to be good at risk. Christian, please.
Thank you very much, Hernan. That was great. Lots and lots of good questions and comments in the chat. So what I'd love to do is just to confirm that we're going to send the model, the Excel model, out to everybody that's joined us on the Zoom session. We're going to send a copy of the slides out as well. If you're watching this on LinkedIn Live, just type please in the comments if you want to get the resources, and I'll make sure to send those out to you as well. If we're not connected, please connect with me because I may or may not be able to send them to you if we're not connected. And any questions you've got, if you're in the Zoom, don't worry, you're going to get it. You're going to get the resources anyway. I can see a flurry of pleases. It's just if you're on LinkedIn, if you're watching on LinkedIn, because I can't, if you're on the Zoom, I've got your details, don't worry. So I've got a couple of follow-up questions, but if anybody else wants to raise their hand, go to reactions, raise your hand, and then we can get you up on stage as well in a second. So thanks again for the presentation. Really, really interesting. Where and how would we get the data to start to populate some of this? You know, let's say we don't know where all this data is. Where would you suggest we look as a starting point?
We are measuring the security incidents and near misses, and it's part of the way that we are learning. We also have a lot of data in our systems, complaints from customers, delays. We have management reviews. When we are planning, and we have monthly reviews saying what we are delaying, what there is something that is out of control. So we are keeping this data as an explanation between our budget versus real. We also have a lot of data coming from insurance. We are, if it is a risk that we can insure and we have a policy, we are going to have a number of claims. We also have a lot of data coming from industry data, and in many industries, we can buy data on different incidents. And if we don't have the data, the first question is, maybe we should. Maybe we should start measuring when there is a claim, when there is a near miss, and the chances are that if the target is important and matters, we are going to have data. In 2023, we have a lot of data that we need to use better. Usually it's the other ways, like how we can select the right data. But let's think that we have a new technology, we have a new machinery, a new work in a new country and somebody wants to do a very fancy project in Venezuela, and we never had this project around. So even though we don't have the data, there are methodologies that we are using. For instance, calibrated estimates that we use data from these different experts, and we are measuring how well they plan, how well they see that there will be a risk, and we accommodate those results in order to finally being able to estimate when there is no data. And there are also very good scientific research that is showing that it's a very accurate way in order to produce the data when there was nothing before. That it may be the case. I mean, it's new technologies. I am dealing with a lot of new risks in this world. Basically, we wake up each day with a particular type of incidents, and when it comes to IT, to politics, to economics, and still, as long as it's relevant, we can use the data that we have.
Good stuff. Thank you for that. Lionel, you've got your hand up. Do you want to unmute and ask Hernan a question?
Yes. Thank you very much for that, Christian. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Hernan, for a great presentation. Very, very informative. I really appreciate the knowledge that you've shared with us there. But I kind of have a number of questions that came from that presentation. So the practical application of this approach in terms of risk assessments in our day-to-day. The question I have is, when you're looking at RAMs and POWRAs or point of work risk assessments, we usually use the qualitative approach, because obviously that is informed by experience, knowledge, and you've got the different stakeholders as well that are involved in that approach. And sometimes, yes, you can use the quantitative approach. How do you see this working for real life operation on plants, or is this just an application for when you're looking at bigger projects and you're trying to quantify, or you're trying to look at risk from a high risk sort of environment, not when we're dealing with our day-to-day slips, trips and falls, maybe, or falls from, sort of type of heights, type of risk. So that's the first question. And then the other thing that I wanted to ask was, I'm still struggling to see how this approach can be used again in an operational area, so on a building site and in a factory environment, in a manufacturing environment. Or is this something that you have to, or we're talking about to consider for when we're looking at major projects? So from a major project approach, and then you're trying to ensure that you have a quantitative and maybe qualitative approach to managing the risks and hazards involved.
Thank you, Lionel. So if for some reason you need to produce a risk assessment to make somebody else happier, like the top management or the compliance officer, and they are asking only for paper compliance, and they are asking for a risk assessment, go ahead and follow the flow and get the colors and so on. If you really need to make an impact on deciding before you go, before you organize an activity, before you assess the project with different conditions, before you are deploying resources, and you really make want to make an assessment in terms of impacting decision making and not making somebody else happier, you need to use data. That this is, by the way, the role of risk management. Risk management is not a compliance requirement. The question is whether you take one risk assessment in color 3 years ago and check with the actual losses. do this type of back testing, and you're going to discover that all the discussion that you got were finally different from what data is showing. One of the things that we are doing with these models is to always learn from what we planned and what happened. So we are back testing the model to be sure that we are planning better in the future. And this is something that you can only do when learning from mistakes in the past. When there is data and there was a model and there was an assessment, it's much easier than you think. It's much easier than you think. And also, if it is an approach that you may discover in your journey that is not really improving something more than a check saying that, oh, look, we have a risk assessment, and you discover that, you don't have a lot of energy to know in order to improve and try something different. If you discover something that it was not improving decision making, it was only the perceived risk, it was even assessing risk as areas of concerns, try to do something different for you, for your learning, and it's going to be much easier. With this energy, with this approach, you are going to be a much better planner, to my eyes. Give it a chance. You can have even the two assessments together and see your stakeholders. They are they happier with the colors, or they are happier with understanding how much money they need to do in terms of control, reserves, insurance, pricing, conditions, or parties. What do they ask? We are serving other people. We are protecting other people. Ask them, ask your client what they prefer. But don't buy that it's too complex. It's not.
Not that I thought that. Sorry, follow-up question. Sorry, Christian,
Yes.
to just bypass you there.
No, go ahead. Yeah, it's all right.
Yeah, yeah. So sorry. No, the reason why I was asking is because you spoke about stakeholders that are involved, right? So when I'm looking at risk assessments and I'm dealing with operational stuff, and they want to know how to manage their day-to-day hazards and risks, I think it's easier for us to use qualitative approach when it comes to certain things like that. But I think the answer there that you've just given is that if you want to do better in the design stage, then this is the best approach. Then I can sort of understand its application as well, and appreciate it in what you've just said there. So I think for me, like I can see its application, and I can see the value that it will bring to the table. But I think I still feel that the qualitative approach actually helps other stakeholders maybe get also their input in whatever we're trying to do, so that we've got sort of a combined approach to making the workplace safer, I think, personally.
I guess there's a difference as well between who you're trying to communicate with and what their understanding is and what you're trying to achieve through the communication, because I think you could do a lot of this quantitative work and the correct modeling and come up with your scenarios, but you could then present those scenarios in an easy to understand way for somebody on the shop floor. But that doesn't mean that you wouldn't necessarily get value from doing the pre-work to begin with. Is that a fair assessment? What do you think, Hernan?
Yes, absolutely. And also, we don't need to justify if it is a requirement or a best practice. We don't need to say that there is a risk. We can say, actually, this is the way that we are protecting because it's a best practice. So just try to scare people with the colors and the heat map that everything is going to be ready if they are not controlling. It may be also focused on a compliance requirement or a best practice. If they are asking for some consultancy about how they need to manage very operational safety controls, you can say, I don't care. This is something that you need to do. I am the security officer here. I am the expert. Go ahead. I don't need to say, oh, look, but if you're not doing that, the risks are going to be very high. You can also always look for using your mandate here. I think that we got time for another question at the end. We are almost there. There is 1 minute, but Andrew, you have
Yeah, Andrew can come in, and I'm happy to go a bit past the half hour. That's no problem for me. So if anybody wants to stay, then that's fine. Andrew, do you want to unmute and ask the question?
This Andrew. I'm not sure how many Andrews there are.
Yes, you.
Yes.
You're the one with your hand up. Yeah, don't worry.
So Hernan, thank you very much. So I think, Christian, actually, it was less of a question. It was an observation, but I think you answered it to Lionel's point. I think you can back into expressing risks qualitatively from a data-based assessment. And I think, Lionel, to your point, sometimes it's much easier to say to people, if we need to put these in order, if we're looking at a bath of water, is it hot or is it cold? We need some way to have an agreed way of agreeing on the relative heat. We need a way to have a simple way to compare risks. And then what you showed at the end, I think that would work very well for a highly technical project when somebody wants to rate everything against dollars. But sometimes in organizations, not everything can be boiled down to dollars. People have raised the point that it's very difficult, although insurers do it. It's very difficult for a company to say, we believe that one person's life is worth X amount, and therefore we de-risk to that. So I think there are times when we have harder metrics, and we have metrics where we need to design our own system. But then for the decision makers in the organization, rather than presenting them with different scales and things, it can be easier when we put it all into a simple to understand scale, and we could have a series of values, a series of words or colors or whatever, as long as they're pre-agreed. And I think that helps at the higher levels of an organization. Say, I can look at all of my risks, the entire risk environment, and then decide where to deploy my resources. So I think you can back in, and I think, Lionel, you touched on that. I think somebody touched on that in the quotes. You can take the metrics and then do your risk-based analysis using values, but then present those in a more simple to understand way. And I think often that works, particularly when, importantly, when you're working in a multicultural environment, it can be very difficult to pin down. So I think that we can back into that. The concern I have with this, if you go back to your second last slide, or recalling your second last slide, when you run the numbers like that, we have to be very careful. I think we can give the impression that what we are presenting is much more specific than it actually is. And even in your model there, you had quite wide values on the estimated likelihood of an event happening. And then we have ranges of values for possible loss. Once we rinse all of that through a giant spreadsheet, we end up, and I think you said it was $406 average cost per event. That gives us an idea of specificity that often doesn't exist. And I think if we say to people, this is the risk in a single dollar value, we're now talking in a large building, we're now talking that as people walk in and out of that building, the change in their pocket actually is relevant at that level, because we're talking about single dollars. And I don't believe often that we can be that specific. So if we become too specific with the data, we may then make people think, oh, this is only a 47% chance or 48% chance or 43% chance. One, I believe that's misleading. Secondly, we're then presenting this linear relationship between investment in mitigation measures and reduction in risk. And that I don't believe is linear. I think that is more logarithmic or exponential. And therefore we have to be extremely careful when we present these numbers about the risks we're dealing with. And I think the best example of that is if we look at all the collapses in the banking industry, nobody has more data on down to single dollars. Nobody has more data on what is happening. Nobody runs bigger models on risk mitigation than the banking sector, and still they're getting it wrong. And I think it's the specificity and their belief in the models getting down to 3 decimal points or whatever they do that makes them have more faith in the model. So I agree, most of the work that I've done is on the same lines as you, although not in the same detail, that I think a quantitative basis is super helpful. It gives us a lot of confidence, and we can back check, et cetera, et cetera. But I think we also need to be slightly careful when we present it as something that is highly, highly specific, that in itself can be just as misleading as a sort of red, amber, green type of matrix?
Andrew, we usually have some statements that there are some decisions that we are not tolerating to do. We are, you say how I can tolerate or I can quantify the cost of a life. This is something that we don't put in an agenda on assessing risks. It's not that you're going to lose one finger or two fingers or three fingers. If there is a protection that we can use, we're going to use it anyway, whether it's making sense in the financial terms or not the financial terms on the colors. So if there is a control that we can use in order to protect physical safety, we use that. Just because it's a requirement, it's a need, whether there are risks or not. It's not like building a stadium in Qatar, the assessment that we are doing, at least not in my experience. And in terms of research, and what is finally demonstrated is that the numbers will always overperform any assessment that you are doing with such a test and the wet finger in the air. That is the perception, and this is the bias. And if you are looking at the numbers, finally you're gonna get facts, and they can be a better guidance on how you are planning and you are learning more. How the banks are doing, this is a financial risk. We are talking, and also I don't care. I want to do whatever that is better for my organization and my day and what I want to do as a professional, trying to be this data-driven and use investment methodologies and looking for science, trying to say no, because the banks or Credit Suisse is using data to assess risk. And at the end of the day, believe me, in terms of how they are assessing operational risk, they are much less accurate that we foresee or we think from the outside. So there are a lot of the different considerations here. Christian,
yeah, I know, Hernan, you're short on time. So listen, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining. Do join us again on another version of the Safety Roundtable. And we will be sending out the resources to everybody that attended and everybody that's commenting on the posts, and get those out to you. So thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.